He didn't blink when he told me, and that's what scared me to my core. Marines don't scare easy, but this guy, his voice dropped low like he was about to spill something classified. You ever heard something you wish you hadn't? He started. Something that makes you feel like if you turn around fast enough, it might be right there? I thought he was joking. It seemed simple and terrifying at the same time. Then he said, it was late 90s intel work. Straightforward stuff. Training reports. Until I opened one folder that was left where it shouldn't be and realized Marines were seeing things out there. Things walking on two legs. Big. Wrong. He looked at the floor with a look that didn't make sense to me at first. Then he started revealing more, and I watched as the words slowly fell from his mouth. Night vision confirmed movement. Wolf-shaped. Upright. Stride length, not human. Also, not animal. And then the words, further sightings demanded immediate follow-up. Next, he swallowed hard and revealed this. That follow-up, well, it never showed up. But the howls started after that. And that's when guys stopped laughing. This all happened when he was stationed on a big West Coast Marine installation in the late 90s. He didn't name it. He just said if you've ever stood on one of those ranges at night, you already know how vast they feel. Miles of brush, empty dirt roads, cold wind cutting across open ground. He told me nothing ever happened in that office. Same fluorescent lights, same stale coffee, same folders. He said the horror started like every other stack of range reports. Plain manila folders, typed lines, nothing dramatic. Then one file felt off before he even opened it. No markings, no special tags, but someone had slipped it into the middle like they didn't want it noticed. Or maybe they did. He thought maybe it was misfiled, routine admin stuff, until he saw the first sentence. Unidentified canine-like entities observed. He stopped reading for a second, thinking it was some kind of joke or code name. Marines joke about everything, but this wasn't written like a joke. It was clipped, clinical. No speculation, no color, just facts. He flipped the page, observed moving on hind legs, night vision confirmation, estimated 2 to 3 subjects. He told me his stomach dropped, not because of what it said, but because of how dry it was. Someone wrote that like they were describing weather patterns, like seeing wolves the size of men, walking upright, belonged in a routine military document. He remembered staring at the envelope number on the folder, wondering why he'd never seen that range code before. And as he turned another page, the next line felt like a whisper in the room. Motion pattern suggests practiced bipedal locomotion. He didn't know what to do with that, and before he could process it, there was something else. A short note at the bottom of the page, almost like whoever typed it didn't want it noticed. Further sightings demanded immediate follow-up, but then nothing. There were field notes from recon Marines, not new guys, trained observers, the kind who don't get rattled by the things that terrify most people. Notes that said things like, multiple figures, large, estimated over 6 feet, lupine profile, upright stance maintained without visible instability. Those words stuck with him. Wolves aren't supposed to move like that, and these didn't wobble or drop to all fours. They held posture like they had balance and weight, like their bodies were built for it. Another page, night vision sightings, grainy descriptions of tall silhouettes crossing ridgelines. No tail sweep picked up, heads forward, shoulders broad. He paused there because the report specifically said something about the gait. It didn't say running. It said deliberate advancement. Cover closed quickly, not sprinting, not lunging, more like approaching. Then the sketches, simple outline drawings, the kind Marines make when they don't have time to get fancy. Tracks nearly twice normal spacing. Heel-like back pressure. Claw marks forward, not splayed like a dog. and one note scrawled in the margin, almost like someone couldn't help themselves. Not natural stride. Not right. He said he sat there longer than he should have, pages still in his hands, feeling like every sentence was pulling something unseen a little closer. And the part that bothered him most wasn't what was in the report. It was what wasn't. There were no names, no signatures, no classification stamp, just enough to prove it was real, and just enough missing to make it feel like someone tried to erase it. Whoever put it together tried to sound routine, but there were cracks, little details you don't include unless you're trying hard to stay calm while writing them. There was a line about radio chatter, short bursts, one Marine saying he had eyes on movement, upright form, another cutting him off with negative, maintain focus. That wasn't protocol. That sounded like someone trying not to panic. Then he found a notation about thermal scans. Heat signatures inconsistent with known wildlife. The wording was stiff, but it hinted at something wrong, like the shapes ran hotter than they should, or maybe colder. The report didn't clarify, almost like they didn't want to put the real observation in writing. He flipped another page and froze at a handwritten add-on. A different pen, different handwriting, rushed, slanted. Sound carried across the valley. Deep, no echo, not human. He asked me if I'd ever heard a sound so low it felt like it vibrated in your ribs, because that's how he imagined it when he read those words. Not a howl, not a growl, something in between. A throat not built like anything you know. Then the strange physical notes, details you wouldn't invent because they're too specific. Branches snapped high up, above head level. Soil impressions deep enough to suggest heavy weight, but foot shape too narrow. And a torn training dummy, canvas shredded clean, not frayed, as if something sliced through instead of ripping. But the worst part, he said, was a single line typed near the end, citing team reports, feeling observed over prolonged period. No contact, no attack, just the sense of being watched, followed, measured. He told me that's when he realized the report never once said threat. It only said presence. And somehow that choice of word felt a lot worse. It didn't take long before he started noticing the way guys talked when they thought no one else was listening. Marines don't do superstition, not out loud. These were quick glances over shoulders, conversations that died the second a door opened. He remembered one Lance Corporal saying, "Heard it again last night. Not a coyote. Too low. Felt it in my teeth." Another guy told him about hearing something pace the tree line during fire watch. Slow, steady steps. And then there was the story nobody wanted to claim, but everyone whispered. A squad out in the training area who stopped mid-movement drill because they heard howling that didn't echo. Coyotes will echo. This didn't. It sounded close inside the range, like it was threading between trees. And every time it cut off, the silence felt heavier, thicker. Guys started talking about seeing eyes, too far apart to be human, too high to be a dog, eyes that didn't shine like normal animal eyes, more like they were reflecting something that wasn't light. A few swore they saw shapes stand up behind the brush, big shoulders, long arms, heads that didn't tilt right, like the neck wasn't built to move the way it moved. Someone found deer remains one morning, body intact, neck snapped clean, no tearing, no blood spray, just broken like a toy. One Marine joked it was a mountain lion. Nobody laughed. Mountain lions don't snap necks and leave the rest untouched. He said the weirdest part wasn't the stories. It was the way leadership reacted, not by shutting the rumors down, but by ignoring them completely. No briefings, no warnings, just this quiet, firm refusal to acknowledge anything. Guys rotated off night watch faster than usual after that. Nobody complained about being reassigned to motor pool duty or ammo counting. And every once in a while, when the wind came in from the ranges just right, someone would stop talking mid-sentence and stare out toward the dark, waiting to hear something they couldn't explain, but somehow expected. That's when he realized it wasn't just what he read in that folder. It was the way the whole base seemed to pretend something wasn't out there, even while acting like it definitely was. He always said he never saw a full shape, never looked one in the eyes. But that almost made it worse because the things he did see and hear felt like pieces of something bigger. One night, walking back from the admin building after staying late, he heard what he thought was a person running in the brush beside the road, except it wasn't running the way a person runs. The rhythm was off, like it covered ground in fewer steps than it should. Heavy, then nothing. No crunching twigs fading away, no breathing. Just gone, like it stopped and waited. Another time, he cut across a back path by the motor pool and found tracks in the dust. Too long to be human. Heel deep, toes dug in like claws. And the stride. He said he tried stepping heel to toe in them as far as he could stretch. He couldn't even match half the spacing. It felt like something had crossed the trail in 3 steps where he'd take 8. There was also the deer, or what was left of it. He didn't stick around long, no blood smear, no signs of struggle, legs limp, neck twisted clean. He remembered the quiet more than anything. Bases have noise, generators, voices, radios. But some nights, out on the edge of the training area, it got so still it didn't feel natural, like the air paused, and right in that quiet, he'd hear it. A low sound way out there, not a howl, not a growl, more like breath pushed through a throat that wasn't built quite right. He said he never went looking after that, didn't tell his buddies, didn't want to be the guy who heard things, but every time the wind carried from the ranges, he'd catch himself listening. And every once in a while, when he thought he was alone, he'd feel that prickling sense someone was keeping track of him from just inside the tree line. He didn't see it, but he was sure it saw him. He didn't talk about any of it until years after he retired. No reason to bring it up, he said. No one would believe him, and he didn't want to sound like one of those guys who sees monsters in the woods after a couple enlistment cycles. But when he finally did bring it up, it wasn't for attention. It sounded like he just got tired of carrying it alone. He told me he kept thinking about that folder, how it wasn't there the next week, how no one mentioned it, not even in passing, like it was never supposed to show up on his desk at all. And the way he described it, he didn't say they covered it up. He said it felt like someone higher already knew, and the paperwork slipping through was the mistake. Before we ended the conversation, he repeated one line from that report. He didn't blink, didn't look dramatic, just said it like he was reading it right off the page again. Further sightings demanded immediate follow-up. Then he shook his head. There was never a follow-up. He leaned back, quiet for a long time, like he was listening for something only he could hear. Then he told me one last thing, something he never put in writing. You know how animals make noise to warn you off? He said. Whatever those things were, they didn't warn. They watched. I asked him what he thought happened to them, why the sightings stopped. He looked past me toward the window as if he expected something in the dark to answer first. They didn't stop, he said. We just stopped talking about it. He didn't give a moral, didn't offer comfort, just stood up and left like he'd said too much already. And sometimes, late at night, when I replay that conversation, I think about those empty training ranges, the wind moving through the brush, the long, silent gaps between branches, and I wonder if somewhere out there something still walks on 2 legs, taking its time, waiting. Officer Mike Larson had been on the night shift for years, working the streets of Libby, Montana. It was one of those towns where after dark, most people were either asleep or winding down their evenings in the local bars. Mike always said his job was predictable. Sure, he had the occasional call about a bar fight or a lost dog, but nights in Libby were typically uneventful. And in a small town where everyone knew each other, things didn't usually get too strange. At least, not until that night. It was around 2 a.m., and Mike was on his usual route, slowly driving through the north side near the old lumber mill. The place had been shut down for years, ever since jobs started drying up in town. The whole area was eerie at night. The giant, crumbling buildings, rows of empty windows, machinery rusting away under the starlight. He usually didn't go near it unless there was a reason, but something had been nagging at him for days now. Some of the townspeople had been reporting strange noises out by the mill, grunting sounds, heavy footfalls, things that didn't sound right. Kids even joked it was haunted. Mike wasn't superstitious, but he liked to keep people safe. He thought he'd do a quick pass just to put those silly rumors to bed. He parked his cruiser near the entrance and got out, flicking on his flashlight. The air was cold and dead quiet, except for the occasional chirping of crickets. He moved the beam across the ground, past old scrap metal and broken glass. The place felt frozen in time, almost like stepping into another world. As he got deeper into the yard, he started to notice a faint smell. It was hard to describe, a mix between wet fur and something rotting. He felt his stomach turn but kept moving. Then he heard it, a sound, like something scraping against metal. He froze, his flashlight darting in the direction of the noise. "Hello?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. He continued, stepping carefully around a pile of old pipes and scrap, all the while keeping his flashlight moving. The smell was getting stronger. Just then, his light caught a glimpse of something in the shadows. Something crouched low behind an old piece of machinery. It was hard to make out, but he could see a figure, hunched and hairy, covered in fur. This thing had limbs too long and lean to be a bear, and as it moved slightly, he saw it shift its weight onto 2 legs. Mike felt his chest tighten. He had never seen anything like it before. It stood there, halfway behind a steel beam, and he could make out its face in the faint light. Its eyes were large and reflective, like a cat's in the dark. But they weren't animal eyes. They looked almost human. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Mike felt frozen, every instinct telling him to back away slowly, not to make any sudden moves. He tried to control his breathing, his heart thumping loud enough that he worried the thing might hear him. The creature was breathing too, slow and heavy, each exhale forming a mist in the cold air. Mike could see the steam rising from its mouth, each breath a reminder that it was very much alive. Then with a sudden jerk, the creature took a step forward, revealing more of its body. It was tall, at least 7 feet, Mike estimated, with arms that hung down longer than seemed natural. Its hair was thick, dark, and tangled, hanging off it in tufts. He noticed a strange scar running down one side of its face, like it had been in a fight with something, or someone, before. Mike's first instinct was to pull his weapon, but something stopped him. It was hard to explain, but it didn't feel like a smart move. This creature wasn't acting aggressive, not yet anyway. It was watching him, maybe just as curious as he was terrified. Mike didn't know why, but he decided to try speaking to it, keeping his voice low and calm. "What are you?" he said, barely above a whisper. To his surprise, the creature tilted its head, almost like it understood. Mike swallowed hard, but figured it was just reacting to the sound of his voice. Slowly, he took a step backward. The creature watched him, its gaze intense but calm. For a second, Mike thought maybe it was going to let him go, but then it took another step toward him, faster this time, almost gliding over the ground. Mike stumbled back, nearly tripping over a piece of debris as he raised his flashlight, trying to keep it in view. "Stay back!" he now yelled, his voice louder than he intended. The creature stopped, staring at him with those haunting eyes. Then, without warning, it let out a sound that he can still hear to this day. It wasn't a growl exactly, more like a deep rumbling, as if it was trying to communicate but didn't know how. The sound grew louder, almost vibrating through the air, until Mike felt it reverberate in his chest. Just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the creature turned and loped away, disappearing into the shadows of the mill. Mike didn't wait around to see if it would come back. He turned and ran, his flashlight bouncing wildly as he made his way back to the cruiser. Once inside, he locked the doors and sat there, catching his breath. His hands were shaking as he grabbed the radio, but he hesitated. What was he supposed to say? After a minute, he turned off the radio, sat there for a while longer, and then decided to head back to the station in silence. He didn't report anything unusual that night, just wrapped up his shift as usual. In the following days, Mike avoided going near the mill. He knew he wasn't ready to see whatever it was again. Once, he heard someone at the station mention more noises out by the old mill, but he pretended not to hear. As far as he was concerned, he'd keep that encounter to himself. Even now, years later, he still thinks about that night. Every time he passes the old mill, he can't help but glance over. He never saw the creature again, but he still wonders what would have happened if he'd pulled his weapon, if he'd yelled instead of tried to talk. Maybe it saved his life that night, keeping calm, or maybe it was just luck. Either way, it's not a story he tells often. It's one of those things people wouldn't believe unless they saw it themselves. But he knows what he saw, and every so often he catches himself wondering if it's still out there. But he never convinces himself to go out and look. Late one October a few years ago, just a couple of weeks before Halloween, Jeff and Sandra took a weekend trip to the Great Smoky Mountains. They rented a small cabin on the North Carolina side, not far from Bryson City, and planned a couple of hikes to explore the area. Saturday evening, after a long day of hiking and a nice dinner in town, they were sitting on the cabin's front porch, just relaxing. The air was crisp, the stars were bright, and the woods around them were quiet and peaceful. It felt perfect, like one of those nights you just don't want to end. They talked, laughed, and eventually fell into one of those comfortable silences where they just listened to the sounds around them. Then Jeff heard something that almost sounded like a group of people moving their way through the woods, but it got louder, like something much bigger than a human was moving around and snapping branches as it went. He gave Sandra a look, eyebrows raised, and she shrugged, not too concerned. They'd seen all sorts of animals in the Smokies, even black bears from a distance, and they'd never had any trouble. They both keep looking in the direction of the noise, but before they could say much, Sandra whispered, "Do you see that?" Jeff squinted toward the trees, following her gaze. At first he didn't see anything, but then something stepped out of the shadows, a dark figure, broad-shouldered and hairy. It was hard to make out the details in the dim light, but it was definitely walking on two legs, like a person, but too tall and too hunched, moving awkwardly. They stared as it lumbered closer, getting closer to the cabin. Sandra grabbed Jeff's arm, her fingers digging in, and whispered, Is that a bear?" Jeff shook his head slowly. "No way. Bears don't walk like that, and it's too tall." They watched, barely breathing, as the creature moved past the edge of where their porch light could reach, close enough now that they could make out the shaggy hair hanging off it in thick clumps. Its shoulders were hunched forward, like it was slouching, but even then, it looked like it had to be over 6 feet tall, and it was broad, thicker than a person would be. Without looking away from the creature, Jeff said softly, "We should go inside, just slowly." Sandra didn't argue. They both rose quietly from their chairs, keeping their eyes on the thing, moving as stealthily as they could toward the cabin door. But just as Jeff reached the door handle, the creature stopped. It tilted its head almost like it was listening, and then, as if sensing them, it turned. Jeff felt his stomach drop as he caught a glimpse of its face in the faint glow from the porch light. It wasn't human. It looked like something halfway between a gorilla and a man, with dark eyes that seemed very calculating. Sandra gasped softly, and the sound seemed to snap the creature's attention fully onto them. It took a step forward, and that was all it took for Jeff to yank the door open and practically shove Sandra inside. He followed, slamming the door behind him and locking it, heart pounding so hard he could barely think. Inside, they stood in the dim cabin, catching their breath, staring at each other with wide eyes. "What was that?" Sandra finally whispered. "I don't know," Jeff replied, shaking his head. He felt a little foolish. Maybe it was just a bear, he thought, some weirdly deformed bear that happened to walk on its hind legs for a while. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He'd seen bears. He knew what they looked like, how they moved. This wasn't a bear. But what else could it be? They crept over to the window and peeked out. At first, everything seemed quiet again, but then Jeff saw it moving along the tree line like it was patrolling, looking for something. It stopped, crouched, and lifted its head slightly, sniffing the air. The way it moved was unsettling, methodical, almost thoughtful, like it had a purpose. It didn't seem to be randomly wandering around like an animal. It was watching. "What does it want?" Sandra whispered, clutching his arm but not really expecting him to know. "I have no idea," Jeff muttered, feeling completely helpless. He considered calling someone, maybe the park rangers, but honestly, part of him was starting to wonder if his eyes had been playing tricks on him, if they'd both somehow just imagined it or saw something normal in strange light. But then as they watched, the creature lifted its head, almost looking straight at them through the window. Jeff felt an eerie chill run down his spine as it tilted its head slightly to one side, almost like it was studying them, figuring them out. He half expected it to come charging at the cabin, but instead, it let out a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a hum. It was deep, like it was reverberating through the trees, and somehow, that was worse. It sounded too calm, too calculated. Sandra pulled Jeff away from the window, her face pale. "Maybe we should just wait it out," she whispered. "Maybe it'll just leave." They sat in silence for what felt like hours, every little creak of the cabin making them jump. Jeff found himself running through every possibility in his mind, but none of it made sense. They hadn't seen anyone else all day on the trails, and he doubted someone would go to this much trouble to pull a prank. Besides, it didn't look like someone in a suit. It was too real, too solid, like it was something that belonged out here, something that had been here long before they had. Eventually, they both drifted off, exhausted but too wired to really sleep. When they woke up at dawn, the first thing they did was check outside. There were no signs of the creature, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing to suggest that anything out of the ordinary had happened. It was as if the whole thing had been a strange, unsettling dream. But as they packed up to head back to Nashville, Sandra said quietly, "You know we saw it. Whatever it was, we saw it." Jeff just nodded, not wanting to think about it too much. Part of him wanted to forget the whole thing and just move past it as some freak sighting, maybe even a bear after all. But every time he thought about the way it moved, the way it looked right at them, he couldn't help but worry that they'd stumbled onto something they weren't supposed to see. Probably something that didn't want to be seen. They never told anyone else about that night. It sounded too crazy. But sometimes Jeff found himself wondering what it was doing out there, what its purpose was, and if anyone else had ever stumbled across it. He thought about telling someone to see if anyone else was in the same boat as he and Sandra were, but every time he chickened out. Have any of you had a similar experience? Let's help find someone who can help them out. It was supposed to be a quick weekend getaway for Ella. She'd booked a little cabin in the Ocala National Forest, needing some time away from work and the endless buzz of her phone. The forest was thick and sprawling, stretching over hundreds of miles with rivers, springs, and thick canopies of trees. A quiet place to get lost, in a good way, or so she thought. It was Friday night, and after arriving, she'd spent most of the evening settling in. She had a small cabin on the edge of Lake Dorr, with a nice little porch overlooking the water. There were no other cabins in sight, just her, the lake, and miles of forest around her. That was exactly what she'd wanted. Isolation, quiet. Around dusk, she took a short walk down to the water. The lake looked beautiful, smooth as glass with the last bits of orange and pink light reflecting off it. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and she could hear the sounds of frogs and insects picking up as night began to settle. She felt that kind of peace that only came with being out in nature, away from everything. But just as she turned to head back to her cabin, she felt a prickling on the back of her neck, like someone was watching her. She glanced around, expecting maybe a deer or a fox, but saw nothing. Just trees and darkness settling in. She brushed it off as nerves. It was her first time alone in a forest at night, after all, and made her way back up to the cabin, trying to shake the feeling. She spent the evening reading on the porch, the soft glow from her lantern the only light in the dark. It was almost 10 o'clock when she finally decided to head in. She'd just closed the door and started brushing her teeth when she heard a noise outside. A low, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled over the ground. She froze, toothbrush in her mouth, listening. The sound came again, a long, slow, scraping noise. She wondered if it could be a gator. There were plenty of them in this part of Florida, and it wasn't unheard of for them to wander near cabins. But something about the sound didn't match what she knew about alligators. This sound was different. It was slow, deliberate, like something was dragging itself right up to her cabin. Turning off the bathroom light, she crept to the front window and peered out into the darkness. She couldn't see much, just the faint outlines of trees in the starlight and the edge of the lake in the distance. She waited, barely breathing, but everything was silent again. Maybe it was nothing, she thought. She told herself it could have been a branch falling or some animal passing through. But just as she turned to walk away, she saw something move near the edge of the trees, right by the path leading to the lake. At first, she thought it was just her eyes playing tricks on her, but then she saw it clearly. A shape, big and hunched, moving in a strange, jerky way, as if it wasn't used to walking on two legs. Her stomach dropped. It didn't look like any animal she'd ever seen. It was tall, nearly as tall as the trees around it, and covered in thick, dark hair. She couldn't make out a face, but the shape was wrong for a bear or anything else she'd expect to see in Florida. The creature stopped for a moment, then took a few more steps forward, its movements deliberate, like it was looking for something. Ella felt her heart pounding and a wave of fear washed over her. She'd heard stories of strange creatures in the swamps of Florida, things like skunk apes, Florida's version of Bigfoot. She'd never really believed in any of it, but now, watching this thing move just outside her cabin, she wasn't so sure. She backed away from the window slowly, hoping it hadn't seen her, but then she heard that dragging sound again, only this time, it was closer. The creature was coming up the path toward her cabin. She could hear the heavy scraping noise of its footsteps, the slow crunch of leaves and twigs under its weight. She had no idea what it wanted, but she knew she didn't want to find out. Without thinking, she grabbed her phone and quickly dialed 911. But as she pressed the phone to her ear, she realized there was no signal. She was too far out in the forest. The call wouldn't go through. Her mind raced. She thought about turning off all the lights, hiding somewhere until morning. But then she heard a thud against the front door. It It wasn't a knock. It was more like a heavy push, like the creature was testing the door, seeing if it would open. Ella's heart was racing so fast it hurt. She held her breath, listening, praying it would just go away. But the thuds kept coming, each one harder than the last. It wasn't trying to break down the door, not exactly, but it was persistent, like it knew she was inside and wanted to let her know it was there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the thuds stopped. She listened, straining to hear any sign of movement, but there was only silence. Cautiously, she peeked out the window again, her eyes scanning the dark. The creature was gone. The path was empty, and everything looked just as it had before. She breathed a sigh of relief, but only for a moment. Then she saw it again, further down by the lake this time, crouched near the water's edge. It was staring up at the cabin, watching her. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the starlight, and she felt a chill run down her spine. It looked almost curious, like it was studying her, trying to understand what she was. Ella didn't sleep that night. She sat in the middle of the cabin, clutching a flashlight, and waited for dawn. Every little sound outside made her jump, and she kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see that face staring back at her. When morning finally came, she packed her things as fast as she could. She didn't even bother with breakfast. She just wanted to get out of there. As she was loading her car, she noticed something on the ground near the path to the lake. Large footprints, pressed deep into the dirt. They were bigger than any human footprint, and the toes looked long and wide, almost like a handprint. She stared at them, her mind racing, trying to make sense of it. But in the end, she shook her head, deciding she didn't want to know. She left the cabin without looking back, and as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching her leave. Back in the city, she told herself it must have been a bear, maybe an unusually large one, though that didn't explain the footprints. She didn't talk about it to anyone, not really, because she knew no one would believe her. But every time she thought about the heavy, scraping footsteps and those faintly glowing eyes, she felt that same chill all over again. Some nights when she couldn't sleep, she'd find herself looking out the window, half expecting to see that creature standing there, watching, waiting. She knew she'd never go back to that cabin, never return to the forest at night. Whatever she'd seen out there in Ocala, it wasn't something that belonged in her world, and she was okay with leaving it exactly where she'd found it.